Hey, welcome back to chapter 14. We're going to kind of finish up chapter 14 here. Mostly I'm going to talk about Rogers, but I'll get in Gendlin and Kelly as well at the end. And that'll bring us through chapter 14. Um, One of the things, let's actually, let's go here. And just as a sort of pretext, one of the things you'll learn in this chapter is that this humanistic sort of phase seemed initially to only last a little while. The cognitive psychology that we'll talk about in the next chapter really kind of took over and swamped a lot of these humanistic views, and it was largely because of some of what I was talking about last lecture, that the humanistic approach wasn't very scientific, and wasn't really amenable to experiments and things like that, often because it was focused on the individual, right? And so a sort of case study, as I say, approach seemed more fitting philosophically, but did not make the experimentalists very happy. And so when the experimentalists found a really good alternative, they ran with it. This is also going to be true of some of the therapeutic stuff we're talking about now, in the sense that humanistic therapy kind of got swamped by something called cognitive behavior therapy, CBT. And yet, I think there's some real gems in humanistic therapy. Not only in a potential therapeutic context, it could very well be that cognitive behavior therapy is a better therapy. It at least has more science to support it. But there's still some real good stuff in here, especially when it comes to, in my opinion, how to interact with friends, and especially friends who come to you with issues. They have problems, and they want to talk to you. Many of us don't know how to talk to people. There's this book that was well known for a while that says women are from Venus, men are from Mars, and it talked about how men always, when a woman comes to a man with a problem, the man always just wants to provide a solution. Just do this, just do that. And the claim is that women aren't looking for a solution. They're not looking for someone to come in and give them the pathway. They are looking for someone to listen, someone to empathize with them, and maybe someone to think with. What you're going to see in Rogers therapy is exactly that, a really formal and well specified approach to helping somebody solve their own problems. And that's really going to be the humanistic philosophy, because the idea here is that we're not going to be directive. We're not going to be like Freud. We're not going to try to figure out what's wrong with you and say, okay, therefore you must do this. We are going to be a partner, and sort of a minimally participating partner in your own experience, your own journey, to find out how to make your existence more what you want it to be. Everything's you, right? You define success. You tell me how you want your existence to be. You tell me what it is now, and then you're going to have to figure out how to get from here to there. So this was really Rogers' kind of perspective. I'll throw on the next slide, but before I talk about this too much, this person-centered or client-centered perspective, let me give you an analogy to think about. Imagine that you have goals financially. You would like to be at a certain point, at some point financially, and you're not there now. You're at a different point, a not as good a point financially. And so you might go to a financial advisor with your money, and you might say, hey, this is the money I have. This is the kind of money I would like to have. Can you give me advice about how to get from here to there? All right. And so that advisor would think of you as a client, and they are giving you suggestions for how to get to a point you want to get to. Now, a difference is a financial advisor will often give you specific advice. Do this, do this, do this. Carl did not. Carl allowed you to find your own path, and he advised you along the way. So let's talk about these three principles, and then let me try to give you a sense. I should have written something out, but we'll try something fun in a second here too. So let's start with these three principles. First of all, this is the therapist, okay? The therapist, in interacting with the client, must be first and foremost genuine, okay? They have to be who they are, and who they are, hopefully, is another human being that cares about your existence. a human being that is battling their own existence. They're going through their own existential kind of stuff, but they're here to honestly try to help you get through yours. And they don't try to be an authority figure. They don't try to be, they're not necessarily wearing a lab coat or anything like that. They try to be another human being. So they try to be genuine. Now, acceptance, and especially unconditional positive regard. This was a concept that Rogers came up with, unconditional positive regard, that is a really important concept in a number of situations. What it says is, you're going to allow this person to talk to you, and you are going to try your very best not to pass any judgment on anything they say. So if that person says, there are times I get so angry with my spouse that, I don't know, I want to do X or whatever, and you might think X sounds a little ridiculous, but you don't show that. You all you show is interest, and okay, all right, understand, and empathy. Okay, so empathy is that idea of he says here, tuning into the feelings of others. I would say sort of resonating with the feelings of others. And so if they're expressing a certain kind of feeling, you try your best to sort of be there with them, to get into their mind. And you do that by listening well. So, that's the first sort of key, is listen really carefully to what they're saying, accept it with unconditional positive regard. The feelings are what they are. They're not good, they're not bad, they just are. And be yourself genuinely. Those are the three principles. But then there is this sort of dance that happens. And the dance happens as follows. The therapist is really trying to be a sounding board. And so let's try to give you a feel for this, and then we'll try to actually try and see if it works. But the therapist, you might say to the therapist, listen, generally things are going well in life, but I'm really kind of trying to look for a life partner. And, every now and then I meet somebody and things are going really well, but then at some point I just blow it up. I do something that makes them angry, and it turns into a big fight, and we split up, and it happens every time. And so as a therapist, you might say, okay, yeah, that must be difficult, and empathy, yes, that's really difficult. And you might say, can you give me more specifics? Can you describe a very specific situation where this happened? And so maybe the person goes through a story of something, and they get to a point where they did something, and maybe this is what keyed off the whole blow up. And so then you might say as a therapist, okay, yeah, so you chose that, and I can see why that would be a natural thing to do, but were there other alternatives? What are other things you might have done then? You don't suggest anything. You just ask, are there other alternatives? And the person might go, well, I guess if I hadn't done that, if I hadn't accused them of X, and if I maybe just asked about something, or I expressed a worry or anxiety, and then the therapist might say, well, how do you think that would have turned out? And they say, well, I don't know. We probably wouldn't have started a fight. Would that have been a good thing? Well, yeah, that'd be a good thing. Do you think it might have led to a more open exchange of information? Maybe it might have. Maybe. Well, if you're in that situation again, what do you think? Should you try that? And the person might say, yeah, I think I'm going to try that. I think that's a good idea. And so if we just take that little snippet, let's just examine what's going on. The therapist is just echoing things often. How did that make you feel? What do you think? Blah, blah, blah. But they're allowing you to come up with the solutions, you to evaluate those solutions, and you to embrace or not various solutions. They are your solutions. And Roger's idea was, first of all, this is a respectful way to interact with another human being. You don't try to tell them how to live their life. It's their life. It's their existence. You are there to help them think it through. And that is the respectful way he thought to interact. But he also thought this would be a very powerful form of therapy, because, when someone else tells you to do something, whatever, but when you decide it's the right thing to do, he thought you're more likely to actually do those things, and they're more likely to turn out well. Now, of course, he would talk to clients, and a lot of them said this made them feel a lot better. And that's what a lot of therapists kind of feel like, okay, well, it's working. Everything's great. I'm helping these people solve their problems. But he also got a lot of flack from experimentalists saying, how do you know you're actually having a positive impact? And it was very hard for him to think about the right way to do experiments. And he tried once or twice, and it sort of half worked out. There's a box in the textbook about somebody else kind of supporting one of his theories about creativity and child rearing, how to rear creative children. And that seemed to work out a little bit. But largely speaking, Rogers was getting hit by this notion that, everything you say sounds really good, but unless you can scientifically support it, I don't know. And so that was the bugaboo that kind of plagued Rogers all his life. But when you think about this approach, I seriously think this is a great way to deal with friends in trouble, to show everything I just talked about and to help them solve their own problems and work things through. Now, I wanted to give you a different sense. This has been out for a long time. It's something called ELIZA, and it's a very old AI, or a bot, as we would call them now, kind of like when you're shopping and one of these bots pops up. But this was one of the very first. And it was meant to be a bot that simulated Rogers' therapy. Let's give it a go. Let's see what happens. I don't think I'll have any copyright infringement rights here. Okay, so here's Eliza. And so we can just, how do you do? Please tell me your problem. Well, let's try it. Well, every time I'm in a relationship, I blow it up instead of letting it become more serious. So let's say we say that. All right. And so Eliza says, do you say every time I'm in a relationship for some special reason? Just as context. Okay, this could be problematic. Yeah. This is context. Tell me more about that. Well, when I'm, meet someone I like. I'm always looking for people I enjoy being around. Sometimes. Okay, so this isn't necessarily working so well. Eliza's getting distracted with things, but you get the idea. And by the way, you can go here and play with Eliza and try this stuff out as well. Let's try something. I hate people. They annoy me. People are annoying. Very much so. That is interesting. Please continue. Okay, so what Eliza's reflecting on why she was one of the first bots is the whole idea of the therapist in this situation is that they're not really contributing a whole lot other than to keep you talking and maybe moving you. And she's not moving us very well in the right direction. She's kind of bringing us back to this thing all the time. This is the sense of what a Rogerian kind of clinical experience would look like, where the clinician themselves does not have a doctrine. They do not have some Freudian theory or anything like that. They are there as more as a sounding board than anything else. They have a big ear and a small mouth. Think of it that way. And that's what that therapy is all about. Okay, so again, the therapy probably has sort of lost way to cognitive behavior therapy, although we're hearing a lot about positive psychology again, and positive psychology is a lot of this humanistic kind of values as well. Okay, there's two more two more people in this chapter that I want to talk about just kind of quickly, just so we hit it. That's Eugene Gendlin and George Kelly. And this is more of this sort of humanistic mindset. And so it's just good to kind of end, I think, by nailing this in a little bit more. So, we have this concept now we call mindfulness, learning to pay attention to what's in your mind. That's similar to what Gendlin would focus on when he talked about experiencing. And he thought that a very important thing for us to do was, first of all, to learn to attend. So there's actually two thoughts in this one, and let's break them apart. To learn to attend to what it feels like to live life, what that experience of living feels like. So to tune in on experiencing, and because that's sort of where the critical parts of life are. And he thought for personal growth, you had to learn how to express what you were experiencing, and you could do that in words, but heck, you could do it in music, you could do it in art, you can do it, in sculpture, in dance, in anything you want. But he thought it was very important for people to come into touch with how they're experiencing life, and to try to communicate that in all the various ways. And that when we do that, we get a better understanding of ourselves and our life, and then we're in a better position to make decisions that enhance our experiences. Now, I want to touch, he also focused on, and this was a sort of humanist thing, Rogers was here too, the idea of encounter groups. So we talked about this briefly with Levine or Lewin, the T group approach. It's always talked about very vaguely in the textbook, and so here's how I understand it, but I'd like to go a little further. But the idea is, let's go into the sort of Black Lives Matter kind of situation, and let's imagine that we were all put in groups, and those groups consisted of some people of African American descent, and some people of I shouldn't even say African American, Caribbean descent too, but some black people and some non-black people. And we're asked to talk about various topics. And I think what I understand it is the key to this approach is that, we say something and somebody else might tell us, here's how I heard what you just said. And so to me, how I experienced what you just said might be different than how you experienced it. So when I said that thing, I was thinking a certain thought, this is what I meant to be expressing, but this other person says, when I heard you, this is what I experienced. And sometimes we are very surprised, really? That's what you heard when I said that? Because that wasn't what I intended. But the claim is that people got a lot of personal growth by learning, by getting this feedback from others about how they heard what we were saying, etc. And so that we would come out of these encounters or these T groups with a better sense of how others saw us and how what we did affected their experiences. And this would allow us to grow. So it became something known as the Human Potential Project, helping humans meet their potential. This is the key. I don't know if I expressed that enough in Rogers, so let me express it again. I gave you that financial analysis. Well, Rogers would talk to you about your sort of life analysis. So he would say, if it was the relationship thing, so obviously where you would like to be at some point in time is in a stable, loving relationship with another human being. And where you are right now is you're not. And you're having trouble getting from here to there. And that's what we're talking about. So, again, you're defining the success, you're defining where you are, and you're defining the strategies. But every sort of therapeutic situation, a person might be reaching for a different goal. Their frustrations or challenges in life might be very, very different. And that's fine. What you're trying to help them, each one, is to reach their own definition of what they want to become, who they would like to be, to reach their own potential. Okay. So Gendlin hits that. Now, finally, in this chapter, George Kelly, just a couple of points about George Kelly. One I agree with, and when I teach stats and experimental design, which I haven't for a while, but when I do, I like to tell people that, remember those logical positivists and the probability, Fisher's probability and all that? I say we do that already. If you think someone's lying to you and you're challenging them, you're basically saying, I think the probability of you telling the truth right now is very low. And here's why I think that's very low. And it's so low that I can't accept it. You're rejecting the null hypothesis. All of that I think we do naturally anyway. And for Kelly, he said, we're also always trying to predict the future, just like science is. That our mind is very forward looking. and we're always trying to figure out how the world works so we can predict what's going to happen next. So he thought that was a core part of what we are, and there's good evidence now to believe that that's true, that the brain is always trying to predict the future. But he thought when we did that, we each do it uniquely. Here's the humanism thing again. Because we each develop a set of personal constructs for kind of analyzing the world, and thinking about it. So in the chapter, they talk a lot about people in your life, how you think about the people in your life, and the constructs you use to kind of think of differences or similarities between people. But more generally, the idea is that we each idiosyncratically come up with a way of thinking about things in the world and how they're same and how they're different, and we categorize everything differently. So we each have a unique perspective on the world, and see a lot of things different. And so again, it's kind of highlighting that individualness, that we all have our own experiences, and again, just to echo those bigger ideas of existentialism, that we have the freedom to choose our own way, and that we should be using our will to choose ways that help us grow to become the person we want to be. That's the sort of whole idea of humanistic psychology. Realize that it's a much more, when I say that it exists these days as positive psychology, this is a much more positive view of human behavior. You're not doing therapy to help somebody deal with some deep psychic trauma caused by sex or aggression. You're doing therapy to help somebody become a happier person, as they define happiness. And so that's the kind of cool goal. Alrighty, so there we go. We're kind of into the 60s. We got humanism doing its thing, and bang, like a freight train, we're going to run into cognitive psychology. That is the next story. I will leave that for the next video.